Late evening was slowly descending on the city, filling the streets with a warm glow of street lamps. The supermarket on the outskirts of town didn't have many customers. Only a few people were wandering between the aisles, picking out items before closing time. It seemed to be one of those calm evenings when nothing bodes well for anything. An elderly woman stood in a small line at the cash register. She looked tired, her hands trembling as she took a small wallet out of a worn bag. She was wearing an old cloak that looked too thin for the chilly evening. Her face was covered with wrinkles that showed the hard years of her life, but there was a quiet gleam of kindness and humility in her eyes. A young man, who looked to be in his early 20s, was working at the cash register. He looked bored and unwilling to work. He mechanically punched in the goods without looking up at the customers. When it was the turn of an elderly woman, he asked her a little irritably if she had a discount card. The woman slowly replied that she didn't, and began to put her groceries on the belt. It was the most basic necessities: bread, milk, a small package of pasta, a few apples, and a jar of jam. Her purchases looked so modest that some people in line began to look at her with a little pity. Meanwhile, the cashier punched in all the items and announced the total. The woman opened her small purse again and began counting small coins. Her fingers were nervously moving through the coins, and she was trying not to hold up the line. "Are you serious?" the cashier suddenly said sharply when he saw her putting the small pennies on the counter. His voice was loud enough to attract the attention of the other customers. "This is a supermarket, not a charity." The elderly woman smiled in embarrassment, trying to say something in defense, but her words were drowned in the cashier's mockery. He began to mock her wallet, her age, and then said that she could at least have prepared the money in advance so as not to delay other people. The woman did not know what to do with her eyes. She started counting the coins again, hoping to find enough money to pay. Her hands were shaking more and more, and her eyes were getting sadder and sadder. The people in line watched the situation in silence. Some looked away, some shrugged their shoulders, and some even whispered something like, "Why did she even come here?" The situation was getting more and more tense. The cashier began to express his dissatisfaction more loudly, tapping his fingers on the counter and looking at his watch defiantly. He clearly wanted to finish his shift and not waste time with this woman. It seemed that even the supermarket space itself was filled with cold indifference. The elderly woman, having collected all her coins, looked up at the cashier and said in a quiet voice that she was still a little short. She asked him to remove one of the items, but instead the cashier started to mock her even more, saying that she could not take anything at all if she had no money. Meanwhile, there was a man standing in line who was carefully watching everything that was happening. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap that hid part of his face. His calm appearance contrasted with the tension that prevailed around him. He didn't make any sudden movements, didn't interfere, but his eyes were full of determination. This man was Keanu Reeves, although no one in the store had realized it yet. When the cashier raised his voice again, drawing the attention of several other people in the store, Reeves stepped forward. His calm but confident posture silenced the cashier for a moment. But this scene was only the beginning, for what was to come next turned this ordinary evening upside down. The silence that prevailed in the supermarket for a moment after the stranger's intervention was almost tangible. The cashier, who had just demonstrated arrogance and mocking behavior, was sharply embarrassed to see a man who suddenly decided to defend an elderly woman. But even at that moment, he did not realize who he was dealing with. Keanu Reeves, staying in the shadows, calmly approached the cash register. His gaze, though not stern, reflected determination and confidence. He threw a few bills on the counter, more than enough to pay for the woman's purchases. Everyone present froze, watching his actions. The elderly woman looked puzzled, and even a little scared. She tried to say something again, saying that it was not necessary, but the man stopped her with a short hand gesture. His movements were calm and delicate, radiating sincere concern. The cashier, trying to salvage the remnants of his authority, gave Reeves a disdainful look. "Who are you to give orders around here?" he muttered, although he already sounded uncertain. Reeves didn't reply. Instead, he handed the woman the receipt and helped her collect her purchases. At that moment, it became clear that for him, this was not just an act of help. It was something more, a manifestation of real human compassion, which is hard to see in today's world. After the woman left, holding her purchases and barely holding back her tears of gratitude, Keanu turned to the cashier. "Have you ever thought about what people can go through in their lives?" he asked. "Maybe this woman has lost loved ones. Maybe it's hard for her to buy the simplest things. But this is no reason to humiliate her." The cashier was silent. His face turned red, and he felt uncomfortable under the stares of the other customers, who were now clearly on Keanu's side. "Compassion is not a weakness," Keanu continued. "It's a strength. And each of us can become stronger just by showing a little kindness." These words touched not only the cashier. Other people in the line also thought about their actions and how often they pass by someone else's pain without paying attention. One woman in line even whispered quietly, "I would like to do something like that, but I'm always afraid." Keanu did not continue the conversation. He silently left the box office, leaving everyone in deep thought. But the story did not end there. A few minutes later, he caught up with an elderly woman at the exit of the supermarket. She was sitting on a bench, trying to collect her thoughts after everything that had happened. "Would you let me help you carry this?" Keanu asked, smiling slightly. The woman tried to refuse again, but his kindness was so sincere that she gave in. They started walking toward her home. Along the way, the woman began to tell her story. Her name was Mary, and she lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her husband had died several years ago, and her only son had tragically died in a car accident. She was left alone, and her only comfort was her young granddaughter, who now lived in another state with her mother. Mary was saving every penny to see her one day. Keanu listened attentively without interrupting. His face showed neither pity nor surprise, only sincere attention and a desire to help. When they reached her house, he suddenly said, "You know, sometimes we need a little more support than we are willing to ask for. Is there anything I can do to help you and your granddaughter?" Mary looked at him in surprise. She had never met anyone who was so willing to lend a helping hand. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Their conversation did not end there. Keanu decided to act immediately. He contacted several charitable organizations that could support Mary and even personally arranged for her to meet her granddaughter. For him, it wasn't just about helping, it was about making a difference in someone's life. The next few days became a real miracle for Mary. She not only received financial support, but also felt that her life had meaning again. She saw her granddaughter again, and their meeting was full of joy and tears of happiness. All of this was made possible by a man who was not afraid to intervene in a seemingly mundane situation. The story quickly became known. One of the supermarket customers filmed the video on his phone and posted it on social media. People all over the world learned about Keanu Reeves' act, and many began to follow his example. It was not just a story about kindness. It was a lesson for everyone how one small action can change the lives of many people. Keanu, as always, remained humble. He was not looking for fame or recognition. The most important thing for him was that he was able to help. His words to the cashier that evening will always remain in the memory of many. Compassion is power, and each of us can become stronger just by showing a little kindness. As the months passed, Mary's life began to gradually change after that fateful meeting in the supermarket. The help organized by Keanu Reeves turned out to be more than just a one-time financial support, but also turned into a long-term project. His team organized regular grocery deliveries for Mary, payment of rent for her small apartment, and even help with medical care. For Mary, this was a miracle that she could not have dreamed of before. Every time she thought about that night, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She couldn't stop thinking about how one random intervention by a stranger could completely change her life. But for Mary, it was not just a matter of financial assistance. The most important thing was that she felt needed again and not alone. One day Mary received an invitation. The letter, neatly enclosed in an envelope, was on her kitchen table. It said that she was invited to a charity event organized by the foundation that had been supporting her in recent months. At first, Mary was hesitant. She thought she would not be able to fit in with a world dominated by successful and confident people. But something in her heart told her that she should go. The evening of the event arrived. Mary, dressed in her best, albeit modest, dress, entered the huge hall lit by crystal chandeliers. She felt a little awkward, but she was greeted with a smile and led to a table where other guests were already sitting. The event was filled with an atmosphere of joy and inspiration. The speeches of the organizers and benefactors were intertwined with the stories of those whom the foundation had helped. Mary sat quietly, listening intently, when suddenly her name was called from the stage. She looked up to see Keanu Reeves walking up to the microphone. His eyes were warm, and his voice was calm and sincere. "Friends," he began, "today I want to tell you a story that has inspired me more than any movie or screenplay. This is a story about a woman whose strength of spirit and endurance have become an example to me. Her name is Mary." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Mary, who could barely contain her emotions. Keanu continued, "Mary showed me that even in the most difficult times, the human heart can remain kind and open. Her love for her granddaughter, her efforts to give her something, and her humility have been a source of inspiration to me. And today I want us all to learn more about this remarkable woman." Mary rose from her seat, and the room erupted in applause. She could not believe that all these people were supporting her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy and gratitude. She walked up to the stage where Keanu helped her up. "I never thought my life would change so dramatically," she said, addressing the audience. "But today I'm standing here, and it's all thanks to a man who cared. Keanu, I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for me and my family." After she spoke, the audience gave her another round of applause. But that was not the end of the evening. Keanu walked up to Mary and said quietly, "I have one more little surprise for you." He gestured for her to look at the screen on the stage. A video appeared on the screen, Mary's granddaughter smiling and saying hello to her grandmother. She said, "Grandma, I love you very much, and I want to thank you for everything you have done for me. We will be together soon, and I can't wait for that." Mary could not hold back her tears. It was the moment she realized that everything she had been through was not in vain. Keanu hugged her, and they looked at the screen together, where her granddaughter continued to say warm words. After that evening, Mary's life changed forever. Her story has become a symbol of hope and how one act of kindness can change a person's destiny. She began to participate in charity events, helping other people in difficulty. Her voice has become an important reminder that everyone deserves a second chance. As for Keanu Reeves, he continued to support people like Mary, showing the world that true greatness is not about fame or money, but about helping those who need it most. After that evening, when Mary became the main character of the charity event, her life gradually took on a new meaning. People who had not paid attention to her before began to learn about her story, and this brought with it a wave of unexpected support. But it wasn't just the financial assistance that changed her life. It was the fact that she now felt part of something bigger that mattered to Mary. Mary began to take an active part in the activities of the charity that supported her. She became a volunteer, helping people in similar situations. Her story inspired many people, and she spoke to audiences more than once about her experience. Her voice was quiet, but every word pierced the audience. She spoke about the importance of kindness, compassion, and the power of small gestures that can change someone's life. One day, Mary received a call from the local newspaper. A journalist who had attended a charity event wanted to write an article about her. At first, Mary was hesitant. She had never sought publicity, but realized that her story could help others. The journalist spent a few hours with her, asking her about her life, how she met Keanu Reeves, and how it changed her life. The article was published a week later and immediately attracted the attention of readers. People started sending letters to the editorial board offering to help Mary and her granddaughter. Some even offered to organize a trip for them so they could see each other more often. But the most important thing was that the article caused a wave of good deeds in the city. People were inspired by Mary's story and began to show more attention to those in need. Among the many letters Mary received, there was one in particular. It was a letter from the mother of a little girl who was struggling with a serious illness. In the letter, she wrote that Mary's story gave her hope and faith that even in the most difficult situations, support can be found. She invited Mary to meet with her to tell her more about how her words had affected their family. The meeting took place in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. Mary arrived early, a little nervous because she didn't know what to expect. When the woman and the girl entered the room, Mary immediately realized who they were. The girl was weak, but her eyes shone with life and joy. Mary spent several hours with them, listening to their story and telling her own. She felt that this meeting was necessary not only for this family, but also for her. After that, Mary began to visit the sick girl in the hospital regularly. She brought her books, told her stories, and just spent time together. These meetings gave her the feeling that she could do something meaningful, even at her age. Her life was filled with meaning again, and she realized that even small steps can lead to big changes. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves continued to support Mary, albeit from a distance. He often wrote her letters, asking how she was doing and if everything was going well in her life. Once he even sent her a small gift, a book with his own handwritten note inside. The note read, "Your life is an inspiring story. Continue to be a light for others." These words became a real source of inspiration for Mary. She decided to write a book about her experience, about how one random evening in a supermarket changed everything. Her book became a kind of guide for those who felt lost or lonely. In it, she wrote about the importance of compassion, the power of small acts of kindness, and how important it is not to lose faith in people. The book quickly became popular. People from all over the country began writing to Mary, thanking her for sharing her story. She received invitations to meetings, conferences, and charity events where she could share her thoughts and experiences. She even starred in a documentary film about the power of kindness and how it can change the world. But the biggest achievement for Mary was that her story inspired her granddaughter. The girl, who used to live in another state and rarely saw her grandmother, now became a part of her life. She visited Mary often, helped her with charity work, and even wrote an essay about her grandmother for school. In this essay, she called Mary her hero and role model. Mary's life was full of joy and new opportunities. But she always remembered where it all began. She never forgot about that evening in the supermarket and the person who decided not to remain indifferent. For Mary, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope, and that each of us can become the spark that lights up someone else's life. Years later, that evening in the supermarket remains unforgettable for many people. Mary's story has become a true legend, passed down by word of mouth. But it had the greatest impact on those who once witnessed or participated in this event. This story continued to inspire and change lives even as time moved everyone away from the original event. Mary became a well-known figure in her community. Her book, titled The Light of Kindness, was translated into several languages and continued to sell in large numbers. She participated in many conferences and forums where she was invited as an honored guest. But the most important thing for her was that she continued to help those in need. One day, Mary received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was a man who introduced himself as John, Keanu Reeves' manager. John said that Keanu would like to meet her in person because it was important for him to see how her life had changed since that meeting. Mary was a little confused, but agreed to the meeting. The meeting took place in a small cafe, which Keanu chose specifically because of its modest and cozy atmosphere. When Mary entered, she saw a familiar face. Keanu stood up to greet her, and they exchanged sincere smiles. "Mary, it's good to see you again," he said, offering her a seat. "I've heard a lot about you lately. Your story is being told all over the world." Mary smiled, though she felt a little ashamed. "It's all thanks to you, Keanu. If it weren't for you, I would never have been able to change my life so dramatically." Keanu shook his head. "No, it's because of you. You have become a symbol of how one small act of kindness can grow into something big." Over the next few hours, they talked, reminiscing about that evening in the supermarket and discussing all the events that followed. Keanu admitted that he too was inspired by the story and decided to start a new charity to help people like Mary. He asked her to become his advisor and help him understand the needs of those in difficult circumstances. Mary was overwhelmed by the offer. She did not expect to play such an important role in such a large-scale project, but she accepted feeling that this was her chance to make a difference in the world. Together with Keanu, they started working on ideas for the foundation. They created support programs for the elderly, single mothers, the homeless, and those going through difficult life crises. The foundation quickly gained momentum. People from all over the world joined the initiative, inspired by Mary's story. She became a symbol of the foundation, and her book became its manifesto. At charity events, her speeches always gathered huge audiences. Her words touched everyone's hearts because they were sincere and born from her own experience. One day, when Mary returned home after another event, she found a letter in her mailbox. It said that her granddaughter had written an essay for a school competition in which she talked about her grandmother. The essay had won first place and was now going to be published in the local newspaper. Mary couldn't hold back her tears as she read her granddaughter's warm words about how her grandmother had become her hero. "My grandmother taught me that even one person can change the world if they believe in the power of kindness. She showed me that it is important not to be afraid to help others and always remain human. She is my heroine, and I am proud to be my grandmother." These words left a deep mark on Mary's heart. She realized that her story is not just about her. It is about all people who are capable of compassion and help. She became part of a larger movement that began to change society for the better. One day, Keanu invited Mary to a meeting again. This time he brought her to the set of a movie he was working on. He wanted her to see what his world looked like. Mary was amazed at how many people worked together to create something beautiful. Keanu explained that for him, movies are another way to share stories that can change lives. "And your story, Mary," he said, "has already become part of that legacy. You inspire people not only with your words, but also with your actions." Mary smiled and replied, "I just do what I feel is right. And if it helps even one person, then it's all worth the effort." Keanu nodded. That's how big changes start. With one small act. Mary's story has become a reminder to everyone that each of us can change the world, even if it starts with something very small. Her life has become an example of how kindness and compassion can turn an ordinary day into the beginning of something great. Although she never sought fame, her name will forever remain in the memory of those who saw how one person can make a difference.